So we look at this, but then here's another one. It's like you're reading it and you're like, okay, this is someone that was crushed by God, right? This is the enemy of God. So how is that to be? And especially if it's in the lineage, you know. When we're reading in the Old Testament, especially the Old Testament, maybe you could say about the New Testament, I don't think there's much detail on the behavior of the apostles as opposed to the actions of Jesus and things like that. The New Testament's more about Jesus than it is necessarily stories of people throughout history. But when we look at the Old Testament, we've got stories upon stories upon stories where it's just like, none of it's good, you know? And I've been sick, so Gabriel got sick, he got pink eye. Teresa got sick, she got pink eye. They both got over pink eye. I thought I didn't get it, right? I thought maybe the cold thing, I wasn't too sure. Well, I ended up with a cold, and then I got pink eye. So that's why my voice is the way it is, and my motivation. Actually, I'm fine, right? So, but when we look at the Old Testament, there's a lot, the whole thing is just mistake after mistake after mistake. You know, there's a few good examples, but by the most part, it's not really that good. So, you know what's funny when we look at this is the projector up here on Sunday, I had the Spanish church call me in the evening, it was about almost 10 o'clock in the evening. It says there's a blockage and we don't see anything blocking it. And I'm like, okay, I'm not going to be able to do anything about it right now. It's okay. So then I kind of forgot about it, and I figured, you know, in my particular case, I was like, well, I'll come here on Sunday and check it out Sunday morning, and then if not, I'll use this one. This is kind of a backup one. And then, you know, I'll figure it out. Anyway, so then the other church calls me up and says, hey, it says there's a blockage, and we don't know what to do. So then yesterday, I was like, well, I'll come in and look at it. It must be, you know, more just something simple. And I kind of look at this is kind of what we're talking about, maybe the sin next week, but, you know, it's sometimes your sinful life that you may find dramatic, or traumatic, either way, is maybe not that big of a deal. Because I went up there and the blockage was dust. I just dusted it off my hand, blew it, and it started working, and it worked. It's just, how is your perspective and how do you look at it, right? You know, I think when they looked at it, they looked at, oh, there's a blockage or something wrong with it, as opposed to even investigating it. You know, they could have just went there. And I didn't really think about the dust. When I got there, I was like, oh, there's a lot of dust off there. We're going to have to remember that, and we'll have to keep that dusted off so it doesn't have that. But sometimes we look at life and we look at things as being traumatic. And even this election coming up, I mean, it is important. I think depending on who gets elected, is at least for the next 4 years, the direction of America, right? You know, and some of us will say one direction's good, some of us say the other direction's not so good. I personally say Trump would be a better selection. I know we're not supposed to be on politics and stuff like that, but I've kind of just got over trying to be neutral, you know. Yeah. I'm not Republican, though, by the way. I'm an independent person. I would say that I think the Republicans are just as corrupt as the Democrats. They just look different, right? You know, if they really wanted stuff to stop going the direction they would, they'd do something about it. But anyways, I mean, you know, when you look at, like, nobody wants Trump. The Russians don't want Trump. The Chinese don't want Trump. Iran doesn't want Trump. The Democrats don't want Trump. And some of the Republicans don't want Trump. So there must be something to this, right? You know? Yeah. So when you're not well-liked, there must be something to this. You must be causing some type of chaos that's disrupting the world as they want it to be, right? So when you look at Christ, right? Because Jesus Christ is the only religious figure that I have been able to tell that when you say his name, it causes chaos, right? Because I can sit there and go, oh, you know, I'm Muslim, and Muslims are great people, right? You know, now if you're homosexual, I'm going to probably burn you, throw you off a cliff, stone you, I'm going to do something, cut your head off, do something bad. Or even if you just believe in another religion, I'm going to either kill you or tax you to death or do something, right? Yeah. As a Christian, we just say, well, being homosexual, we love you, but probably not a lifestyle that God condones. You know what I mean? If you really get bad at it, you'll say it's an abomination. But we don't even use that too much anymore, even though that's what it says in the Bible, right? We say, hey, look. So, but yet somehow we're the bad guys because we're with Christ, and they're okay, right? And there's other wanting to do that disrupts the other side or the direction of the world, right? And what's the direction of the world? It's Satan, right? Satan doesn't care. He wants to control you, to bring you to his side, right? And he doesn't care how you get there. He truly doesn't. I used to be a believer that Satan was scary. Satan's going to be like these evil movies and everything. And then, I was talking to Ron, and he was talking about Satan doesn't want to scare the hell out of you. And it made it just else in the collect. He doesn't. You're not going to try to make it bad. He's going to try to make it look good, right? And we even see that in the Bible. It says sin is enticing. Sin is good for a period of time, for a season. And then all of a sudden it turns bad, which is true, And it weighs heavy on you. So, God crushed Rahab because she was the enemy. What's going on here, right? Well, let's go back to here. We got to read in chapter Joshua 2 about this city with walls, right? And then, what's the city called? You guys remember? Jericho, right? And in the city, they were going to go destroy the city, correct? There's going to be some stuff going on there, but it was protected well. And Rahab was a prostitute, all right? And then she was up there, and the spies, they go up into her room, and she asked them, hey, don't kill me, and I'll protect you, right? One of the reasons she said this is because she believed in God, the same Israelites did, right? She believed in that. Now, see, this is the part that I find unique, and I'm not condoning any of it. I'm not saying it's okay, but I do find it unique. How we can have people that live a life that is not in alignment with God, right? Their fruit doesn't look good, but yet they still love God and they struggle with whatever it is. You know what I mean? And nobody condones it. So maybe in her particular case, this is the only way that I'm assuming a single person, right, a woman, maybe the only way she could make money was by selling her body, in other words, to survive. Maybe that's the only way. And there's commentaries that say that, okay? But nobody's condoning it, but maybe that's what it was, right? But anyways, she works with the spies because they're coming to kill the spies. They hide in her room, and then they crawl out this wonderful red rope that I have there. It's a little short, but I think for the distance it's going to drop a little ways. But they climb out to safety, but they say that we're going to protect you, right? They're going to protect her, they're not going to kill her, they'll destroy everything else. So I got a little video here I want to show you about this. This is a little bit longer than normal I play, but it'll be one that's going to explain all this stuff.
Lord, I was with Moses when you handed down these commandments. I was witness to the covenant, the promise of a holy nation. Help me to forge that nation, to lead your people, to inherit their land.
Joshua!
The Lord brought us out from Egypt. He promised us this land. Soon, it will be ours. Come. Are you ready?
We'll search the whole city.
Just find me a way in. We must take Jericho. It's all that stands between us and the promised land. Rahab, my little whore. What are you doing out? You know it's not safe.
Safe enough.
No one is safe.
I can look after myself.
Everyone, return to your homes!
You're Israelites.
You've heard about us?
You have a God who commands the winds and parts the seas.
He saved us from slavery. We are his chosen.
This whole city is terrified of you. How can we fight a people whose God can do that?
Back inside. Open the door.
Can we get out that way? Help us, and we will help you.
Go. I'll stall them if I can.
Open the door.
Come with us.
I can't. My family.
When our army comes, hang this on your door, so they will know not to harm you. You'll be passed over.
Joshua!
Tell me, did you find a way in? Is there a weakness?
Not in the walls, but in their hearts. Joshua, we met a woman. She thinks God has taken the city already. The people melt in fear because they know he is with us.
God is with us. But we've still to find a way in. Moses. My old friend. What would you do? Lord, when I was a slave, you showed me your love and your power. You have given me new life. Would you have us turn back? Who? Who are you? I pray you are with us, and not with our enemies.
I'm with God, commander of the Lord's army.
What does he ask of us?
The Lord parted the waters for Moses. For you. You will split rock. This is what you must do. March around the city once a day with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Carry the ark with you. It contains God's commandments. And he is with you. Then, on the 7th day, march around the city 7 times. Then the priests should make a long blast with the ram's horn. As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, Rahab the prostitute and her family may be spared. For God said she must be spared for the help she gave us.
See, then the military is protected and the people are protected and they can attack them, right? So they had to go through that. And then the other thing too is I always wondered as I read the scriptures is, especially in the Old Testament, there's a lot of death going on, a lot of fighting, right? God's like, hey, kill everybody. You know, it bothered me for years to try to figure out, well, why is God, he's a God of love, why does he kill everybody? I think the very first thing you have to tell yourself is I'm not God, right? You don't understand everything and all the decisions and why God does what he does, and we try to rationalize it. And even when I'm going through this teaching here, I mean, not all of it's going to be theologically based. You take some things, and just like the wash basin, right? And I said toilet water. You know, there's some liberties here as we're trying to describe something, and as we go through this, so we want to be sound in this. But I remember, you know, it was ironically, it was kind of weird when I was. You guys may not be able to relate to this at all, but I was destined for the military. All right. There's two things that I can remember when I was a kid. I think I was in 6th grade or 5th grade. And me and my friend would always play these war games, right? And I'd always win. So we traded sides. I became the offense and the aggressors, and he became the defense. And I'd still win. So, but that's the side point. But anyways, I used to take ant piles, right? You know, don't bash me. I was in 6th grade, okay? And I'd take the red ants, and I'd dig them up, and I'd put them around the black ants, and I'd watch them fight. Right? I know, it's bad. But I was destined for the military, all right? But anyways, that is actually where the realization came in on maybe how God looks at things. Because I'm sure the ants probably thought their life was important, but as a 6th grader, I thought, these are all, you know, and so when God is the only one that can create life, right? He's the only one that can truly understand when he takes life on the value of that life, right? So when God says he's going to go crush all these people, he looks at it differently than we do. He just does. We can't explain it. I mean, I can't explain it. But if he's the only one that can create it, he is truly the only one that is authorized to take it. I'm not authorized to take it. God has given us some leeway with that. You know, I can defend myself with certain things. But I don't have the authority truly on my own to say I can take life. Or God does. Because he's the only one that can create life. And then that's how I started viewing it. And I thought, okay, I still don't understand it all, but it is what it is. And then God had to go through these lands, his people, right? So they could birth Jesus. That was the end result. That was the important. Because that is the fulfillment of how we messed up in the garden, right? Okay? From the garden for 4,000 years until Jesus was born, we're on track back to this redemption, right? We're on track. God's taken us through all this stuff. And then through all that stuff, when you really look at it, it's just really is the depravity of man. How men are messed up. How men are selfish. How we do things. And at first, everybody was God's people. Everybody was an Israelite, if you will, right? You take whatever you want. But then all of a sudden we're like, okay, you guys are still not getting this right. We already had a flood. We wiped y'all. You're still not getting it right. So now I've got my chosen people. Now God had this plan all ahead of time. He already knew it was going to happen. For us, we did it. So he takes these chosen people. And through those chosen people, they birthed Christ, right? And the lineage from Abraham to Jesus. Does that make sense? All right? That's how they were the chosen people, because they birthed the redemption Christ, who redeemed us from when we messed up in the garden. Now, why are we, as people, blamed for what Adam and Eve did? Right? Well, I think that God shows us that your poor choices from your heritage affects your future. Right? And I think we can see that in family. Right? Oh, that's Jim's kid. Right? And Jim's kid was David's kid. Right? And that whole family is just a bunch of alcoholics. They're a bunch of problems. Right? You know, and it's really not that used that so much anymore. But you guys remember when we grew up, we weren't always referred to as Gordon. I was Dean's son, right? You guys remember that? We referred to our lineage. So, but the corruption came into man. We now become selfish, right? Sin entered the world, and now we started making selfish decisions for ourselves. And then that's why we need Jesus. We still make selfish decisions for ourselves. But we're redeemed through Jesus Christ. He's the one that makes us righteous and holy. You see, not only Rahab saved the spies after Israel, she saves her. She is married to who? The guy named Solomon. All right? So she is great and great-grandmother of King David. Only a handful of verses mention the patriarch of Solomon, noting that he was the father of Boaz. And you can find this in Ruth chapter 4, verse 21, and 1 chapter 2, verse 11. So there's not a whole lot of history here, but we're going to go on later on where there's more mention of the women and the roles that they have, and they're going to be tied into the lineage. In Matthew chapter 1 is the genealogy of Jesus Christ. It starts with Abraham, right? And it goes all the way down to the birth of Jesus. But what's ironic about this is out of all these men, there are 5 women that are mentioned. Now, why is it that the women are not normally mentioned in the history? Anybody? Why is it when we look at the heritage or the history of people, it's the man that's talked about and not the women? So in other words, we don't say my mom's name, we would say my dad's name, Dean Walsh, right? I carried off his name. And then my dad's name comes from my grandpa, Walsh. And then that Walsh came from Walsh, right? All the way, that Walsh carries all the way down to our lineage and to Welch, right? And to England. And it goes on from there. So why is the lineage on the man's side and not the woman's side? Anybody? Huh?
Men were only mentioned as the leader of the family.
Men are the leaders of the family, and it even talks about that in the Bible because the man is the head of the household, right? So in other words, we're responsible to make sure that household is a godly house, right? And if the man isn't doing what he's supposed to be doing, then yeah, the woman has to take over and do some of the things that she does, but she needs to be praying the most for her husband, right? Hey, Lord, turn him, okay? But we see today where it's mentioned, and I think it's not only just mentioned, it's promoted, because I've seen it where they talk about, well, if the man's not doing anything, the woman has to take over, right? And I think they've told us that for so long, now it's the men are like, well, I can't do anything because I'm going to be wrong anyways, you know? We've made a timid man as opposed to a manly man, right? And I'm not talking about Christians, I'm just talking about men in general and throughout the history of the men in the United States. So Boaz marries Ruth, and then comes David. Down a long descendant, you get to Jesus, right? It's a line that goes all the way through. Now, these 5 women here are mentioned in this lineage, and I'll point these out. I won't read the entire chapter 1 of Matthew, but I'll talk about these 5 women. We have Tamara, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba, and then Mary, right? So these are my depictions of these women. I'm sure that's not an exact depiction of them, and you can say, oh, that's wrong, that's fine. But the very first one, we have Boaz married Ruth, and then comes David down the line, right? But who is the very first person that is mentioned? Tamar, right? By Tamar. And then we have after that, you have Rahab, right? And then after Rahab, you have Ruth. Then after Ruth, we have the wife of Uriah. Who is this? Bathsheba. So Bathsheba's name actually isn't mentioned, but it's the wife of, okay? Which is still rare. They don't normally do lineage with women involved. And of course, the very last one is Jesus Christ, Mother Mary. These are the 5 women that are mentioned in the lineage of this. Now, they all play important roles, and there's something that's kind of in common. This is where there's some liberty I want you guys to understand. So if you disagree with me in the end, don't bash me. It's just, I'm doing the research, I'm looking at it, and there's something that's in common with all these women, all right? And this is where the whole nugget thing come into for me, where it's like, this is interesting how this looks. It's just like, you know, God doesn't choose perfect people. First off, there's nobody to choose from then, right? There was only one perfect person, which was Jesus Christ. And then, but He chooses people that are obedient to him, that are submissive to him, that are willing to say, yes, I'll step up and do what you do. And then we can say we can do anything through God, right? You know, not everything is possible, you know. I can't go to the spaceship and go in outer space and jump off into space and live, right, without a suit, right? So not everything is possible. I'm sure I can't go underneath the sea without a scuba tank and be under the water for 10 hours. I'd like to say something, but there are some people that have survived for long periods of time and they get revived afterwards. But things aren't normally possible because God has made certain rules. But when we say anything, it's anything within the bounds that God's allowed us to operate in. And in addition to that, when we say anything, it's in an approval of what God's asked us to do, right? So I can't do anything in the name of God and then go out and do evil, because then that's not right. So even when we look at the Old Testament, even though they're doing warfare and they're doing it in the name of God, it's not evil because God has a purpose for this. There's an end result that he's seeking, and there's certain people in his way, and God says, these guys aren't going to let us come through peacefully, so we're going to have to fight them, right? Everybody knows that. He's allowed us to be sovereign. This is the part that I think when we read the Bible that we forget. People get to make their own decisions. And the majority of people don't go down the narrow road. They go down the wide path because it's the easy path. And unfortunately, when you go down the wide path and the easy path, a lot of times it ends up being difficult in the end, right? Because, you know, it's easy. Have you ever noticed when you got two groups of people, or you got a group of people that are Christian, and then you got the group of people that are non-Christian, and they're the partiers, or they're the ones that go out and they want to have a good time, per se, right? And you get over there and you're a little bit odd, right? Maybe, you know, all this stuff, and maybe you dress different. And you show up to the Christians, and you know, this is historical. I'm saying it's changing now. I can see it now. But in the past, it's hard to fit in there. You're an oddball. You're not fitting into our group. Where all of a sudden this group will accept you. Like, come on in, have a drink, right? Start having a good time with us. And you get accepted into that group, and that's why they go there. If you look at some of the data, why, you know, before, if you were looking at a homosexual person, they were attracted to the same sex, right? Now it's gotten to where it's not even necessarily they're attracted to the same sex, because they can fit in now. And that's the same with the transgenders and some of these people that cross-dress, if you will, right? It's not that they're truly in this. And this is some research, probably going to get a hard time finding it. But instead of just being natural that way, they're having a hard time fitting in with the rest of their family, the rest of their, in other words, not their family, but their community, right? So you guys know that. A kid goes to school, he's in middle school, he's in high school, and that person doesn't fit in with the rest of the school. So what do? They change. They become something different, and then all of a sudden they're accepted. And that's one of the reasons that these kids are doing this, because they become accepted. They're like, oh, I can do this. Does that make sense? It may not make sense in the true sense, but it makes sense in the sense of they're doing this because they want to be accepted, right? So when you come to Christ, that's one thing with Jesus Christ, is he accepts us where we're at. You guys remember that where people are like, well, I don't want to go to church, and I don't want to become a Christian because then I'm going to have to change my lifestyle. I'm going to have to change, right? People used to always say that when I was doing it. I don't want to be a Christian because then I can't do what I want to do. I have to change. Well, the realization is you don't have to change. God accepts you exactly where you're at. And then let's just see what happens after that, right? And I know if you truly accept Christ, life's going to change. It's the same way when you're in marriage, right? You meet your spouse, all right? The guy's living one lifestyle, whatever that may be. 10 hours a day he's working, 8 hours a day he's working, whatever it is. And the next 16 hours he's playing video games and maybe getting an hour of rest, going back to work. Let's just say that's his lifestyle, right? The female does whatever they do. I don't know, I'm not female, so they're doing whatever they do. But then when you unite, all of a sudden stuff starts to change. Why? It's not because you have to change, it's you love each other. And your life starts to change, right? Sometimes it's a struggle in the change, but it's just the way it is. Same way when you get in a relationship with Jesus, you're going to change, not because you have to change, not because he's forced you to change, it's just you will change. Right? Now, first person we're going to talk about is Tamar, right? She's a prostitute, and she plays a prostitute, if you will, to trick Judah, right? And this is the father-in-law that's sleeping with her, and this is in Genesis chapter 38. Now, when we look at this, whether she plays, all these things, she does play a prostitute, and she tricks him into this, right? Don't you remember that? All right? So she's the daughter-in-law of Judah. And what happened here? Who died? 2 sons died. And what is supposed to happen when your spouse dies and you're the single mom is the other brother supposed to marry you, and the first kid that you have becomes the deceased son's lineage. Does that make sense? Well, the father-in-law didn't want to do it this time, and the son didn't want to marry, right? So she tricks him in, and she's acting as a prostitute, so she sleeps with him. And then she asks, well, hey, what do I get for this? He goes, I'll give you a goat. And she goes, well, in the meantime, why don't you give me something else so I can assure that I get my goat back, right? So what does she get? Some of his stuff that proves who he is and that she was with him, right? So then she goes back and dresses into her normal stuff, and then he says, hey, go give my goat, tells the servant, go give my goat to that prostitute, right? The temple palace, and give her the goat. And they can't find the prostitute. He says, hey, where's the prostitute at? There hasn't been a prostitute here for a long time. Then they're trying to figure out, well, she ends up pregnant. And because she's pregnant, right, now there's an obligation on his part, and she proves, like, hey, I got your stuff, and you're the dad. Now, this is the ironic part. He realizes at this moment that she's more righteous than him because he didn't follow the proper rules. He didn't make his son marry her so she could have a son and have her original husband's lineage kept, right? So he says that she is more righteous than I am. And I find that part very unique and a little nugget. Because I'm thinking, okay, she plays as a prostitute, so she tricks you, she lies, she sleeps with you, and you're her father-in-law, she gets pregnant by you, and then all of a sudden now you realize what you've done wrong, and she is more right than you. So it's almost like 2 wrongs don't make a right, and in this one, maybe 2 wrongs did make a right? So I find that pretty odd. I don't still, to this day, don't 100% understand how that works. I just don't. Our society doesn't work like that. I don't quite get it, but that's okay. I don't have to always get everything, and I'm okay with that. Some people aren't. All right? Now, next one is Rahab. Now, who is Rahab again? She's what? She is a prostitute. She didn't play a prostitute, but she is a prostitute. And she saves God's people, right? Or I wouldn't say saves God's people. She saves the 2 of them, but she is in the, what do you want to call it? She's working in cahoots with God and his people in order to accomplish what they need to accomplish, right? His will. Now, what is the one thing that they tell her to do to hang this cord over, right? And then what will happen is you'll get passed over, right? So it's just like when they, during the plagues, they got passed over because they put the blood of Christ on her, right? And then they put a cord on her and she got passed over. So in other words, she didn't get killed and her whole family got saved. See, this is another area where the Bible tells us that because of the man, your family can be saved. But see, here you have a woman that does something righteous and her family is saved with her, right? So those are another unique things that is historical in the Bible. Matter of fact, I would say more often than not, the historical information that is supposed to be followed in those days seems to be not in the Bible. It seems like the unusual is followed in the Bible. Or maybe this is just what God highlights throughout the Old Testament. I mean, we've got to remember, the Old Testament's this big, and it covers 4,000 years. Or we could say 3,600 years, because there's 400 years of silence, right? But that's a long period of time, and he highlights certain things. And it does, by the most part, it doesn't seem like any of it follows the rules that God supposedly is established. So what does that mean for you? That God can use you despite the limitations or the rules that you've placed on yourself. Right? Because I think we do that a lot. Is we put limitations on our own ability or our own decision making based on what we think we can do. So in other words, we establish some rules, boundaries. And then we say yes and no to these boundaries. And I see it a lot. And as much as sometimes I speak until I'm blue in the face, they still refuse to step out. Right? But if you just learn to step out and say, okay, Lord, I'll do what you ask, and I'll stop putting these restrictions on myself, miraculous things can happen. Just allowing that to happen. I mean, I know that Darren, he's supposed to be talking here pretty soon about his situation with the tabernacle and how he finally stepped out, and now miraculous things have happened, right? Even in the end result, you know, he may have a grand illusion of this is what it's going to look like, and the reality is this, right? But what matters is his obedience to God. He stepped out and said, I'm going to do what you've asked, right? Because I don't know, I mean, how many, okay, the Israelites are in captivities, they're slaves for in Egypt for an extended period of time, then they get set free. I don't think they anticipated that they were going to come across this body of water and all of a sudden be stuck there and they can't cross this water and we're going to get trampled by Egypt, right? And then, of course, God holds them off. They cross the water or on dry ground and get to the other side. And then I don't think Moses anticipated him going up to the mountain for just a couple of weeks and then coming down, and they've already screwed everything up and they've made a calf. And they're worshiping this golden calf. I don't think he had anticipated that. I don't think he anticipated having to wander through the desert for 40 years. He probably thought, hey, this is not too far. This trip shouldn't take too long to get there. But instead it takes him 40 years, and then he doesn't ever get there. Right? So a lot of times our journey doesn't look like what we think it should look like, because that's not what God said it's going to look like. But we in our head looked at this, and this is what it should look like. And that's okay to have goals, but don't get so fixated that you're right and God's wrong. Because then there's a conflict there. You start to get frustrated, you start to get angry, and you say, well, this is the way it should have been, this is what I seen, and that's why I never actually seen that at all. You just made that up in your head. So I probably shared this story with you guys. But when I was in Special Forces in the 90s, I'd come home, and my buddies would ask me, hey, what'd you go do? Well, in the 90s, we didn't do a lot of things. I did one classified mission. In the 90s, it was in Mexico. We were doing counter-drug missions. But other than that, nothing was really classified. I mean, then we went to Haiti. That wasn't classified. We went to war over there. Went to war in Iraq when I was in there. But otherwise, it wasn't classified. I could tell you what I did. And I tell you, most of the time it was training. We're just training. I'd tell my buddies this, and they would never believe me. Oh, you just can't tell us. And they never believed anything I said. So finally, I just gave up. I said, okay, fine. Can't tell you. It's classified. They made up better stories than I could ever make up. I mean, I was like a superhero, right? I'm like, man, I'm just like, this is cool, right? So, just allow God to work with you. And anytime we make up stuff, right? We think of it. Have you ever, especially if you work as a subordinate and something's going on as a leader, if you can always give dissemination of information is key to your success. Because if you don't tell the people what's going on, they're going to make stuff up, right? And then whatever they make up is never good. How many people ever made up a story when you don't know the full thing of the story? It's been a positive story. Very rarely it's positive. It always seems to go down this negative road, right? So you make up your own thoughts, you make up your own story in your head, and then the end result is not always good, right? So when we're thinking of our things, now of course, God's called me to ministry, and this is what it should look like. This is where it's going to be. And then I have people telling me this too. So my story gets bigger and bigger, and the result of my story doesn't look like what I thought it could be. And now I'm disappointed, and I'm sad, and I'm angry. And why? And God never once looked at me and said, well, that isn't what I said, right? Like in my case, he just said, come. I said, yes, it didn't give me any results. happy with what God's giving you and cherish it. And can it increase? Sure, when we do it right. Right? So Rahab was a prostitute, and she helps out God's people. Then we have Ruth, right? What does she do? She seduces. What does she do? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Asked him to marry her and come and take care of her and
Right, but there's more to that story than just asking. And then depending on when you read it, which commentary you read it, because, okay, so what happened here is he's in the thrashing house, right? Basically, you take the wheat and you hit it on the floor and you hit it and it separates the wheat from the wheat, right? All right? I'm not a farmer, so my phrase is maybe wrong. But anyways, that's what they do. So he's working all day in there, and her mom, right, mother-in-law tells her, hey, go down there, get in your best dress, put on all your perfume and makeup, make you smell real good, right? And then figure out where he's sleeping. Once you figure out where he's sleeping, after he goes to bed, go lay in his bed and lay at the foot of his bed, right? Now this is where people start adding stuff to the story, all right? Because he wakes up in the middle of the night, the story says, he wakes up in the middle of the night, notices her, says, hey, what are you doing? Stay here, stay the rest of the night, but we can't tell anybody. She sneaks out, nobody knows, right? But see, as humans, we make up the rest of the story. So what happened is when he woke up, he seen her, he seduced her, or she seduced him, and they had sex. Matter of fact, that's probably the most common thing that's told, right? So she seduces him. Now he's obligated to fulfill this law, right? Which he mentioned, Leviticus law. Now he has to marry her because they slept together, right? Now this is just, you guys can look at me all funny. Just telling you, this is the most common story out there, but it doesn't say that in the scriptures, right? It says that she slept at the foot of the bed. I've been taught where when she slept at the foot of the bed, that indicated that they slept together. Matter of fact, you probably heard the same story because of the same pastor that told the story, right? That because she slept in the bed and at the foot of the bed, that was a sign that they slept together. So when he woke up and he saw her, he was like, we must have slept together. Or they slept together afterwards. That is actually the most common theory here that's out there. But it doesn't say that in the scriptures. We're making that up again, right? But what does happen is he ends up wanting the land, and he doesn't want to buy the land, because if he buys the land, he has to take on, right, her, and it jeopardizes his property or his land. But he ends up doing it anyways, and he marries her, right? So that's how that comes. So now the story, the most common story, is she seduced him. All right? Just saying. All right? Now the next one is what? Bathsheba. Now this one has a lot of different stories attached to this one. And honestly, none of them are really good. All right? So, who is Bathsheba? Okay. What else? Anything else? Solomon's mother. Anything else? There you go. She marries David. She was Uriah's wife, but then she seduces David because she knew that David was going to be up there looking down while she showered, bathed. And then he's seen her, and he says, who's this beautiful woman? I want her for myself. So go get her. She comes up, and she seduces him. Right? That's a theory. It's a theory. I'm just telling you, I'm going to go through all the different claims that there are. First, David raped her, just outright raped her. Right? I don't think that was a good claim. Okay? The other claim is that Bathsheba seduced her, David. Right? She kind of knew what was going on. She wanted to be part of the kingdom. She wanted to be in royalty status. Her husband was a general, but she wanted hierarchy. So therefore, she knew what she was doing by bathing out in the open. Right? She knew what was going on. She knew that she was menstruating, all this stuff. She was ready to give birth or get pregnant. All this stuff was going on. And all this stuff's out there. You guys look at me all funny if you want, just telling you stories. All right? And she seduced him. All right? Now, the next claim is that David raped her because she couldn't say no, because he was the king. So in other words, it's not a yes, it's not a no. She did it because of his position, and she was afraid because of his position. Right? I used to think that. I thought it was plausible. Why would she do this, right? He gets her. She comes up. He realizes who she is at some point, right? Because that's his general's wife. And he has sex with her anyways. Did she want to do this willfully? The Bible doesn't say. Did she not want to do it willfully? But I always thought, well, at a bare minimum, he's the king. And he says, hey, I want to sleep with you. So she probably says yes just for that fact, whether she wanted to or not. But at the end result, is Uriah ends up dying. King David kills him, right? Sets him up in the battlefield. So he dies, right? His initial plan was like, okay, I'm going to bring him back from the battlefield. He's going to sleep with his wife. She's going to say that she's pregnant. All be good and all be covered up. And he's a good general. He's a good leader. He comes back and says, no, I can't sleep with my wife because my men are out on the battlefield. They're not sleeping with anybody. They don't get it with their wife, so I'm not going to do this with my wife. That's not right as a leader. David's like, man, that one just messed it up. Now what do I do? So he comes up with another plan. All right, we have a battle. We're going to send him off by himself in the front. He's going to die and be killed. He ends up marrying her. They have the child, right? What happens to the child after that? The baby dies, right? So I think some of the things, when we see things, when the baby dies, I kind of look at it as like, okay, God did not authorize this, right? It's kind of like with Abraham and who? Abraham and Hagar, and then they had Ishmael. God did not authorize that. So they have a different situation there. You can find all this information in Genesis chapter 3 and also in Romans chapter 12, all right? Or chapter 5, sorry. All right? Now, either way, this wasn't a positive outcome, right? I don't care which way you look at it, which way you want to decipher it. I'm not 100% sure how this happened once she come up to the room. All right? I have a feeling that they must have been both consensual. All right? He looks down and says, hey, there's a beautiful woman. Go get her. I want her up here in my room. He doesn't know it's her yet. She gets up there and he's like, oh, you're my good buddy's wife. I didn't know that. I didn't recognize you that far. The sight's not so good anymore. And she's like, well, I'm here now, right? I don't know what they thought, but I think it was both consensual. That's my personal thought, right? But it wasn't positive. It wasn't good. Now, when we get to this next person, there was nothing that she did wrong. But if we look at first these four, right? Other than the outright prostitute up in the room with Jericho, all the women that we look at, we can say that, all right, they weren't bad. They didn't do anything wrong, in essence. They were, just circumstances, right? Even the prostitute, circumstances. She's not married. She needs to survive somehow, right? So we, as us, we kind of take it and like, all right, we'll make okay. This next person, though, realistically was looked at as very negative by the people around her. But yet she didn't do anything wrong. She was made righteous and was righteous, and she was a virgin, and she didn't do anything wrong. But I would say that everybody else thought she did, which was Mary. All right? Because Mary isn't married yet. So in other words, she hasn't had intimate relations with Joseph. She ends up being pregnant. God conceives her, right? And that's how Jesus comes about. You know what's interesting? Now, I don't know how true this is, especially when you're looking at stuff on the internet, but I just saw a story, and I've seen it before, long before the fake news, so maybe there's some truth to it. But there was blood found, and they believe it's Jesus' blood, it had how many chromosomes or whatever's in the blood? 46? Right, 46. Well, they found 44 in this blood. 23 of them was the woman's chromosome Y, and the X is the men's, and there was only one on the men's side. And then that was the blood. But then when they tested the blood, it was still alive. They claimed that to be Jesus' blood. I don't know anymore what to believe on anything anymore, what you see, but it'd be interesting, right? With Mary in itself, she was conceived by God, but Jesus still had the lineage of Joseph and Mary, okay? She was looked at as somebody that did something wrong. In other words, she had sex outside of marriage. Joseph was even going to try to get rid of her quietly, right? So he wanted to do it honorably. That shows he was an honorable man as opposed to saying, there she is, let's stone her, right? Now, ultimately, she probably would end up being stoned. Something bad would happen to her, but he didn't do that. And then he gets visited by the angel. And the angel says, hey, this baby that's in her is of God. You need to take her, and Jesus, and all this stuff. So he takes her, then they leave, right? They move. Why did they move? Probably because their reputation's bad, right? Now, I don't quite understand that part, honestly, because it seemed like it happened pretty quick. I mean, when did they start showing? 3 months into this, right? But somehow, they would have known. Not too sure. That's at least the way I interpret the story, that they would have known that she didn't do something proper. All these women are victims of some type of sexual improprieties, right? In other words, they've all used sex to gain what they needed or wanted. Does that make sense? Is that fair enough? But yet, when we read the scriptures, we all kind of sit back and we can explain it away as like it's okay, right? And then, of course, we know the whole story of Mary, so we don't have to explain it away. But at the time, I think Mary would have probably been the worst off out of all of them. I think she would have been very looked at as negative by the people who would have known her. For the other ones, it sounds like in the scriptures that somehow that it turned out okay. They all end up marrying important people, right? So, whatever happened. But see, the other thing, too, when I was reading some commentaries and doing things, and this is the part that makes sense to me. I don't know if I've reconciled it in my brain yet, but it does make sense, is today we look at all these actions of these women as negative. But not necessarily back then it was negative because of the culture that was happening. Not, like I said, I don't quite understand it. The way they wrote it, it kind of made sense to me. You know, you look at David, I mean, how many wives did he have? He had more than one. He also had other mistresses, or what are they called, concubines? Right? It's several of those, and yet somehow he turns out to be good. You know? Those are things I can't figure out in my life. But we don't always have to understand everything in the scriptures in order to understand that God is good. God is holy. God is righteous. What I do understand is man is not. So God, in essence, in a way, to me, is using people despite their flaws. And their willingness to be obedient and say yes to God doesn't always determine that they've had the best lifestyle and made the best decisions. Right? I mean, I do. I see people that had pretty bad decision making in their life, and then they become very effective for God. Then I see other people that pretty much make good decisions in their life, don't seem to be too bad, but yet they're not effective for God because they're basically saying no to Him. These other things are more important. So really being able to step up and doing stuff for Him. And it's not going to be up here. I mean, how many preachers do we need, right? I mean, you want to take the place, fine. It's not, this isn't like my thing, I guess. My thing is allowing you guys to do what you need to do, But God wants to make you effective in what he's asked you to do. And it looks different for everybody. You know, it's like when we look at all these women here, they are all in the line of Jesus Christ. They're all part of who Jesus is. Does that make sense? The lineage, the family heritage of him. But none of them probably were best decision making in the decisions that they made. But in the end result, because they said yes to God, a positive thing came out of it. Jesus Christ, King David, all the way through that, right? So it matters our yes more than anything else. Now, before we finish up here, hopefully today wasn't too melancholy. I don't know. I feel melancholy. I'm trying to, my voice is trying to be more exciting. No donuts today from my Marilyn Everett, Joseph, I think it is, right? They were there every year for their anniversary. So, anyways, when we're walking with God and when we're looking at our life situation and we want to determine it should look like this, right? Remember, that isn't necessarily what God said it's going to look like. Jeremiah 29:11, we all look at it as like a promise to everybody, which it can be in essence, right? Because God says everything can be used, right? But those people didn't see the promised land. Very unlikely, even if one that was born that day, because of 70 years they're still in captivity before they got to the promised land. And then getting to the promised land wasn't all that easy, right? Like one of the pastors I heard, they went to the land of milk and honey. But what comes with honey is bees. What comes with milk is a cow that kicks you, right? So you got beat up along the way to get to the land of milk and honey, you know? And I think that's what happens with us a lot of times, is we do things for the Lord. It's not always easy. And then when we say yes to the Lord, sometimes Satan steps up and goes, wait a minute, I like you where you're at. You're keeping that seat warm, that's fine. Now you want to step up, all of a sudden he wants to start harassing, right? But he can't do anything to you unless you let him. I mean, he'll bump you up because we're humans, right? You can affect us for a little while until dancing, right? But our authority lies in Christ. Our protection lies in Christ. And Satan can only harass you. He can only influence you if you allow him to, right? We all get influenced by Satan for a moment. What we don't want to be is influenced by Satan for an extended period of time, right? I mean, maybe I'm just the only one here, but I know you can trick me, and I'll realize, back on track, right? Lord, forgive me, right? You know, we're not walking perfect. God would love us to walk perfect, but he knows we're not going to walk perfect, right? But he wants us to walk perfect with Christ. What that means is we're saying yes, right? So we're going to finish this up next week, and we'll be talking about sin. And how sin weighs on you. And the effects of sin. Is that something? Okay. All right. I don't know if Dave wants to sing or not. What do you want to do? I don't know. Mixed emotions right now. Hey, let's stand. I want to just pray for everybody. You know. Thought I was going to finish early today because Dave finished early, but we're on time. Thank you, Facebook, whatever, YouTubes, all these good, wonderful people for watching. Make sure you share. Appreciate it. So, Lord Father, we just come to you, Lord, and we just want to thank everybody. We want to thank everybody for being part of your kingdom, Lord. And, you know, I don't know if people are saying yes or no to you. I don't know where they're at in their walk. You know, sometimes I might have a little bit of an idea, but by the most part, they know and you know. We just ask that you give us strength, give us encouragement, and give us endurance to go the long haul. Despite the outcomes of what we think, Lord, let us understand that the outcome is dictated by you and not by us. Our efforts matter. We got to plant it and we got to water it, but you're the one that grows it. So you'll allow it to see a maturity through you. So Lord, allow us to walk well with you. Allow us to be obedient towards you. And we want to thank you. In Jesus' name,